Hi everyone, it's Patricia again, and today I wanted to play with you. You be the judge. So in this activity, I have a list of different court cases, and I'm going to read the case and the general idea of it. And at the very end, you have to decide if you think the courts ruled for or against the person that we're talking about in this case. So use your critical thinking skills in this game to think about how somebody might have judged the situation that this case is about. And after each time I read a case, if you want to pause the video for a little bit and think about what somebody might have judged about it, you can do that and then start the video over to find out the answer. Let's begin. So the first case is titled, Baby, It's Cold Inside. So a young woman in Massachusetts was renting an apartment for $250 a month. A few months after signing the lease, an underground pipe broke and she was without heat and water for more than 10 days. The landlord insisted he was trying to fix the problem, but was experiencing delays. She continued to live in the apartment, but withheld $35 from the rent payment, claiming the apartment was inhabitable during the 10-day period. The landlord took her to court. Do you think the court ruled for or against the landlord? So who's wrong here? Is it the landlord for making her pay all the money still, even though a pipe broke and she couldn't live in the apartment? Or was the lady in the wrong for not paying the full amount up for her apartment? What do you think? So the court ruled against the landlord. The court ruled that the woman had the right to withhold the rent and continue to live in the apartment because the landlord had breached a contract when he was unable to provide a continuous livable space. So this next case is titled Changing Seats. So in London in 1875, a shareholder in a theater company was entitled for free admission for any of the unsold sections of a theater for a particular performance. He was admitted and seated. During the performance, he moved down into the reserve section where there was an empty seat left by a patron who had decided not to attend the performance. The management asked the man to return to a seat. He refused, and he was asked to leave, so he sued. Did the court rule for or against the shareholder? So for this one, the court ruled against the shareholder and held that even though he was a shareholder, he had no greater privilege than an ordinary member of the public who had been admitted by payment. So this next case is called Only Girls. It says a Rhode Island boy wanted to play volleyball in high school. Since the only organized teams in the state were all female, he was not permitted by law to play. He went to court to challenge the constitutionality of the law and the statute that gave the state federal money to fund the girls' league. The league argued that the law that supported the league was adopted to encourage female participation in sports that had previously been dominated by males. Did the court rule for or against the boy? So for this one, it says the court ruled for the boy, saying that the intention of the law was to provide equal opportunity to both genders to participate in sports. Except when a contact sport is involved, both genders should have an opportunity to try out for the sport. So this next case is called the smelly spouse. It's a little interesting. It says, in the middle of divorce proceedings, Anne decided that she could not tolerate Seamus's presence in their apartment any longer and had the locks changed. Normally, this would not be acceptable to a divorce court because Seamus was not physically abusive. However, Anne argued that the abuse took another form. Seamus had not bathed and changed his clothes in weeks, and in such a small apartment, the situation was unbearable and she needed to take action. Did the court rule for or against Anne? So interestingly, it says the court ruled for Anne and agreed that there was no reason she should be subjected to the uncomfortable situation that existed before Seamus was locked out. So this next one is called the incriminating phone booths. It says the FBI placed microphones on top of two public telephone booths after discovering that Carl used them routinely in suspected gambling activities. Incriminating conversations were recorded, and Carl objected to the recording being used as evidence because it was obtained without a warrant and violated his Fourth Amendment rights of privacy. The government contended that it was not a violation since the microphone was on top and not in the phone booth. Did the Supreme Court rule for or against Carl? So with this one, it says the government ruled for Carl because a phone booth is like a home in that it is a protected area where a person can reasonably expect privacy. So this next one is called additional costs. It says Gary and Linda hired a general contractor to build an addition on their summer home and paid him half his fee in advance. The contractor hired subcontractors and work began on the house. The general contractor disappeared, leaving the addition only partially completed and the subcontractors unpaid for their work or supplies. The subcontractors filed liens against Gary and Linda's summer home in order to be paid for their time. Gary and Linda took the matter to court. Did the court rule for or against Gary and Linda? So, in this case, it says the court ruled against Gary and Linda, and the liens against the summer home remained in effect. Gary and Linda had to borrow money against their city home in order to pay their liens. So this next one is called the judge's suggestion. It says a 5-year-old girl living in England in 1899 was severely bitten by her neighbor's dog. Her father filed suit to recover damages for her injuries. During the trial, the judge told the jury that if they thought the scar on the girl's face caused by the bite was likely to be permanent and then this might affect her prospects of a good marriage, they might consider such possible loss in assessing the damages. And the judge was charged with misdirection of the jury in suggesting this manner of consideration. Did the court rule for or against the judge? So in this case, it says the court ruled against the judge and held that it was misdirection on his part to instruct the jury in such a manner. This next one is called caught scalping. It says ticket scalping is the practice of selling a ticket for more than the original price. It is against the law in New York to do this. A British woman visiting the U.S. purchased two $40 tickets to an opera. When she realized later she would not be able to use them, she ran an ad to sell the tickets for $60 each. A policeman saw the ad, answered it, purchased the tickets, and then arrested her for scalping. The woman claims she did not know it was against the law. Did the court rule for or against the woman? So in this case, it says the court ruled for the woman, saying that the letter of the law would find her guilty, but the spirit of the law was such that it was not there to snare every unsuspecting individual. This case is called the privileged conversation. It says Mr. Miller was sitting in the kitchen with two friends when Miss Miller came in and asked what he had been doing. During the course of the discussion, it was revealed by Mr. Miller that he had committed a burglary with his companions. When the law caught up with him and he was brought to court, the wife was asked to give testimony regarding the conversation with her husband. Mr. Miller claimed that it was a privileged communication between husband and wife. Did the court rule for or against Mr. Miller? So in this case, it says the court ruled against Mr. Miller. Because the conversation had taken place in front of the two friends, the privileged communication rights did not apply. So this next one is called the football tackle. It says during a football game in England in 1985, Harrison tackled Wilkes and severely injured him on a blatant foul. Although Harrison contended it was unintentional, he was asked to leave the field. Wilkes sued Harrison for negligence, arguing that the recklessness of the foul had caused his injury. Harrison asserted that the tackle was an integral part of the game, and Wilkes had consented to the risk of injury when he decided to play. Did the court rule for or against Wilkes? So in this case, the court ruled for Wilkes and held that players do assume part of the responsibility for injury when they play a game. However, because of the extreme nature of the foul, the court found that Harrison's actions had fallen far below the standards reasonably to be expected for anyone pursuing the game. This next one is called the Toboggan Trail. So it says the city of St. John in Canada decided to provide a toboggan slide for use by its residents. The city used a tract of land owned by a horticultural society. A trail was marked out and cleared that led down a hill and dropped several feet down a bank onto a frozen lake. A sign at the top advised people to use the trail at their own risk. A man sued the city for injuries when he dropped down the bank onto the lake, injuring his back. Did the court rule for or against the man? And so in this case, it says the court ruled for the man and held that the course should have been designed free of potential dangers. The city could not expect a person to assume the risk of concealed dangers, such as the drop at the end of the run. This next one is titled Flood Damage. It says in 1881 in the city of London, a creek ran down to the river. On this creek, a dam was constructed by the city to help control the water during flood conditions. During an exceptionally heavy rainstorm, the gates were opened to prevent flooding above the dam. However, part of the Dixon's wharf and a barge loaded with coal were damaged by the release of water. Dixon sued the city for damages. The city of London contended the heavy rain was an act of God, which was outside of its control. Did the court rule for or against Dixon? And so, for this one, the court ruled for Dixon, stating that the rains were an act of God. However, the opening of the floodgates were the responsibility of the city, and they were liable for any damages caused. This next one is titled The No Kidney Stone Policy. It says Mr. Pryor, while attending a baseball game, became ill with a severe pain on his side. He was rushed to the hospital where he passed a kidney stone. When the hospital bill was submitted to his health insurance company, they refused to pay because Mr. Pryor was not treated by approved physicians and the passing of a kidney stone is not life-threatening, both of which were stipulations of the health policy. Mr. Pryor sued the insurance company to pay for the bill. Did the court rule for or against Mr. Pryor? So in this case, the court ruled for Mr. Pryor and ordered the insurance company to cover his medical expenses. This case is called the snow-covered stairs. It says it was snowing lightly but steadily when Joanne arrived at Jen's gift shop. An outside set of wooden chairs led to the second-floor gift shop. On her way up, Joan slipped on the snow-covered steps and fell, breaking her arm. She filed a suit against Jen's gift shop for negligence for not clearing the snow off the steps. The owner of the gift shop testified that she had swept the stairs every 15 minutes since the store had opened in the morning. Did the court rule for or against Joanne? It says the court ruled against Joanne and held that because it was a steady snow and the owner had tried to keep the stairs as snow-free as possible, the owner was not negligent in this case. This next case is called the altered bracelet. It says Pat and Judy Chaplin purchased a 14-karat gold bracelet which had to be shortened. During the measuring, a mistake was made by the salesperson and the bracelet was cut too small. The bracelet was then lengthened by using gold soldering and adding the section that had been removed. The Chaplins wanted another bracelet because, although the solder was undetectable, it made the bracelet seem less than new. The store refused and they went to court. Did the court rule for or against the Chaplins? And in this case, it says the court ruled for the Chaplins because it held that the intent of the Chaplins was to own a new bracelet, not one that was modified even if it was undetectable. This court case is called Questionable Injuries. It says Ella Murphy, an 83-year-old woman, was unable to walk after being injured in a motor accident in England in 1965. She did not refuse treatment and was not faking, but there was no apparent physical reason other than old age for her inability to walk. When Ella went to court to recover damages for the accident, the defendant, who had caused the accident, argued that he should not have to pay damages because Ella had not proved that her injuries were valid. So did the court rule for or against Ella? And in this case, the court ruled for Ella and held that the burden of proving that the injuries were invalid belonged to the man who had caused the accident. Ella had not refused treatment or intentionally misrepresented her injuries. Therefore, she was not barred from recovering for all of her disability, even though some unstated portion of it might have been magnified by her mind. The next case is called Educational Malpractice. In 1973 in San Francisco, a former student of the public education system sued the Board of Education for educational malpractice. He asserted that the teachers had routinely passed him on to the next grade level without educating him. He felt the teachers had the duty and responsibility to advise his parents of his true progress in reading level, which never exceeded that of the 8th grade. He was therefore unable to cope with modern life or compete successfully for a good job. Did the court rule for or against the former student? And in this case, the court ruled against the former student and held that it is impossible to establish the exact amount of education that is due to each student. There are too many factors besides the teachers in obtaining an education. The next case is also one about building and contractors. It's called the falling tool. It says Pearson was a contractor who was working with his builders on a particular house. When they had finished the outside, they removed the scaffolding and hired a subcontractor to do the internal plastering. One of the men employed by the subcontractor walked into a plank, which caused a tool to fall out of the window of the house and injured a man walking along the road. The man sued Pearson's company for negligence, claiming they should have provided protection for the public. Did the court rule for or against Pearson? In this case, it says the court ruled for Pearson and held that there was no evidence that the falling of the tool was a probable accident which might reasonably have been foreseen so as to make it Pearson's duty to provide against it. This next case is called ESP. It says Helen's twin sister was traveling by plane to Europe. One night, Helen awoke with a start and experienced a painful burning in her chest and abdomen. She felt suddenly alone in the world and knew that her sister had been killed in a plane crash. In spite of professional help, she continued to have a feeling of emptiness for many months after. She sued the airline for emotional injuries for having extrasensorily experienced her twin sister's death. Did the court rule for or against Helen? And in this case, it says the court ruled against Helen and held that the injury was too remote and unexpected to be deserving of compensation. The next case is called emergency action. It says an emergency room doctor decided that a woman who was brought in needed surgery. The on-duty surgeon was unavailable, so an off-duty surgeon was asked to perform the operation. Before he could operate, the woman died of cardiac arrest. The woman's husband sued both the off-duty surgeon and the hospital. The surgeon claimed that he was immune from liability under the Good Samaritan statute, which protects off-duty doctors who respond to emergencies. So did the court rule for or against the woman's husband? And in this case, the court ruled against the woman's husband because it agreed that the off-duty surgeon should not be punished for responding to an emergency medical request when he was not obligated to do so. This next case is a little interesting. It's called the traffic incident. In Ontario in the mid-1960s, Ben was driving along a highway one night when he came upon a slow-moving vehicle driven by Dell. Ben had made several attempts to pass. In each case, the fact that Dell increased his speed prevented him from doing so. He flashed his lights and honked repeatedly until Dell stopped his car, blocking the road. Dell got out of his car waving his fist and was met by Ben, who punched him once in the chin, fracturing Dell's jaw. Dell sued for damages. Did the court rule for or against Dell? So Dell's the one that got punched and was blocking the road. So it says the court ruled against Dell, stating that Dell's act of stopping his car and blocking the road was in itself an act of assault, and that Ben was within his rights to ward off an attacker. Dell had invited the treatment he had received, it said. So this next case is called bad description. It says in Saskatchewan in 1928, a horse was found wandering on a man's property. He turned it in to the animal warden and placed an ad in the newspapers, but no one responded. The warden then gave notice of the sale of the horse, and the animal was sold at auction. The original owner then came forward claiming the horse. He insisted that both the newspaper ad and notice of sale had wrongfully described the horse's markings, and he was unable to identify it as his. He sued the new owner. Did the court rule for or against the original owner? In this case, it says the court ruled for the original owner. Although the description of the animal's markings varied very little from the actual ones, it was enough for the court's opinion to render the sale invalid. So this next case is called Going Once. And it says the Lawrence family decided to auction off the contents of Mr. Lawrence's parents' house upon their death. The decision was a difficult one, and at one point during the sale, Mr. Lawrence realized that he could not part with the baby grand piano and stopped the bidding, which had reached the point of going once, going twice. The buyer protested, saying that once an item is listed and the sale started, it cannot be withdrawn. Did the court rule for or against the buyer? In this case, the court ruled against the buyer. The seller may withdraw his property at any time before the hammer falls and the bid is accepted. And this last court case we're going to do is called Crash Landing. It says in England, at a major airport, a small plane was coming in for a landing when it became apparent that the plane was in flight path of a much larger jumbo jet. The aircraft control tower radioed the small plane to abort the landing and fly to the right or left to make way for the jet. The plane followed the instructions, but was caught in the air turbulence from the jet and crashed. The pilot sued the airport for not warning him of the possible turbulence. So did the court rule for or against the pilot? And so in this case, the court ruled against the pilot and reasoned that in a busy environment like a control tower, economy of words is very important. So it is unreasonable to expect the tower to take the time to verbally warn the pilot. And so that's it for You Be the Judge for today. And if you like this video too, we have many more cases we can explore and see what we think the court would have ruled and then actually see what they did rule on it. So if you like this, you can comment down below that you liked it for us. And I will see you next time. Bye.